Record that.
All right. Installment number 6. 5, 6. That's what this is. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is Dr. Kelly Nelson Birks. I'm the pastor of Messiah Reformed Church in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm sure you know that very well by now, and we're glad you keep coming back. You know what the definition of insanity is, right? To keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. No, I'm not saying you're insane, but it's like, I know some people watch me after a while on this subject of eschatology, and they keep hoping, maybe his outcome's going to be different this time. Maybe he's going to say something different. Maybe he's not going to take the rapture away from us. Maybe he's going to go. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to honor Christ, honor His Word. Yeah, but oh my gosh, the church has always believed. Excuse me, the church has not always believed. And what church are you referring to anyway when you hear people say something like that? You know, predominantly the church that has always believed in the yet future to us second coming from the middle of the 2nd century and specifically from the 3rd on has to do with the church at Rome. It has to do with the Roman Catholic institution, which is not the New Testament Church of the Lord Jesus Christ. Absolutely not. They have a works righteousness horror story of a blasphemy relative to transubstantiation and a whole number of other things, and that's not what this is about tonight. But that's the church. When people tell you, for the last 2,000 years, the church has always believed that the second coming is still in our future, that's that church they're talking about, because there are others, especially since the Reformation. You get into the 1500s, the 1600s, the 1700s, and into the 1800s, the result of the Reformation. You start reading commentaries on the Olivet Discourse of the book of Revelation, about the dating of the book of Revelation. You're going to start to see things that are quite a bit different than what you're used to hearing in the United States and over in evangelical churches in Europe, for instance. It's a whole nother world. And guess what we're going to do tonight? Remember, I have been threatening to do this. I have been telling you that we have a teaching series coming up real soon, which is going to require that I bring out the books. Now, I already brought up one book 2 weeks ago. We referenced Kurt Aland's A History of Christianity, Volume 1, saying some very interesting things about the middle of the 2nd century and the beginning of what Mr. Aland called the postponement theory, that it got to the point with the writings of Justin Martyr and 2nd Clement and some others that a new theory that hadn't been spoken about before, known as the postponement theory, began to gain ground, and it began to take off quite a bit. He even talked about it taking off as having a life of its own in the history of the church, middle of the 2nd century and forward. And this aspect of the second coming being postponed is something that the church has always desired, especially when you get to the middle of the 2nd century and forward, simply because once all of the Jewish influence after the 1st century is pretty much gone out of the church, and you're dealing with a church that's made up of a Greco-Roman school of thought, pedagogy is what's that called. When we start looking at phraseology that talks, where people start talking about the end of the world, they're reading passages in the Bible about the sun, moon, and the stars going out and falling from the sky, and a new heaven and a new earth, and this sort of a thing. They start looking at a literalistic cosmology, and a cosmology that's basically saying these things should be taken in its actual sense. I mean, even the term literal does not originally mean what people use it for. Literal means according to the meaning, according to the literature. It depends upon what they're meaning to say in that passage that is literal. People will say, well, I take the Bible literally. Well, if you take the Bible literally, then God's a big giant chicken. Because the Psalm talks about the fact that He covers us under His wings, and we trust under His wings. And Jesus talked about how that He would love to have gathered the people of Jerusalem unto Himself like a hen gathers its chicks and things like that. I mean, is that what you don't really believe that, do you? No, of course you don't. But when the Bible talks, when you talk about taking the Bible literally, what we mean is what it actually meant by what it was stated. For instance, and this is part of what we're dealing with tonight, episode 6, I haven't even given you the title yet. But for instance, we have slang in our culture. All cultures have slang, but here in the United States, if somebody was to say, if one of you guys was to state a truth to me, I would say, well, I'm hip to that. I'm hip to that. We know what that means, right? That means I agree with that, I understand that, and I agree with whatever it is you just said. And I said, I'm hip to that. But is my hip really involved with what they just said? No, because that's literal. You say you take the Bible literally. Were you taking me literally when I say I'm hip to that? What does my hip have to do with what was just stated right there? So there's slang. Just like there are word pictures in our language, there has always been word pictures in the language of the Hebrews and in the Hebrew language in particular. And what we're going to do tonight as we start off with episode 6, is we're going to start talking to you about the heavens and the earth. What is the heavens and the earth in the Old and the New Testament? What does it mean when it talks about the heavens and the earth were created and formed? What does the Bible mean when it uses the phraseology heavens and earth or sun, moon, and stars? Are we to be understanding, for instance, in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, Jesus talks about the sun going black, the moon turning to blood, the stars falling from the sky. Modern day prophetic prognosticators like to take that literally in accordance with a actual Greek Greco-Roman cosmology of a sort. And so literally they would say the stars fall from the sky. But according to the literature and the meaning of that, as Jesus was expressing that to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, he was using language like, I'm hip to that. He was using language that was accepted and embraced and understood within that Hebraic culture. See? And this is one of the things that we have missed out on greatly here in the West, in the United States, Great Britain, Western Europe, and that kind of thing, where the evangelical church has tried to interpret these things because there has been such a loss in the church. It's been mostly a Gentile bunch. There's been such a loss of its Jewishness and its Judaic understanding relative to this type of figure of speech, this metaphorical speech. And so we end up getting things goofed up. For instance, as we dig into this today, and by the way, you can always write to Dr. Birks here at this address, as it comes down right here, ktestifytotruth@aol.com. ktestifytotruth@aol.com. I'll get your letters. I'll respond to them as best I can. I'll try to reach some of them on the air. As a matter of fact, I got one I was going to bring tonight. I was going to read it to you, and I left it at home. I apologize. Try to remember next week. But you can always write to me in regards to this. Also, you can also, I hate even saying this. I don't know. I'm so unhip when it comes to this. But you can tweet me. What did I mean by what I just said? You can tweet me. What is that? Twitter? Yes. Twitter. Like in Twitter-pated? No. I'm just so out of it. You're looking at old school right here. This is just, So my brother, when they want to tweet something to me, do they use Dr. Kelly Birks? Dr. Kelly Birks. Okay, so it's Dr. Kelly Birks at Dr. Kelly Birks. I'm sorry. At Dr. Kelly Birks. All one word. At Dr. Kelly Birks. All one word. Okay. Oh, he's got it right there. Hey, there it is. It's right over here. Okay. I'm sure you'll put that there and everything. All right. So you can tweet me stuff, and that'll be just fine. Yeah, I know. Well, are you going to even read them? They'll come to my inbox, I understand. Correct? They'll come to my inbox, So I am making efforts to accommodate myself to the modern mode of communication, and sorry that I'm not as hip as I should be. Okay, enough of me using that analogy. I think you've got that. Let me give you an example of what the problem is with our literalistic, as we use it here in the United States, understanding of some of these prophetic descriptions in regards to the new heavens and the new earth. If you look at 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter, which is where I'm at right now, in my Bible open on my lap, you look at 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter, and you look at things like verse 10 through verse 12. It's got some pretty heady description right there, where if you look at most American commentators, for instance, on this subject of the old heavens and earth burning up, they will to a man talk to you about, that this planet is going to blow up, burn up. God's going to destroy it. And then he's going to make a new planet. He's going to make a new earth. He's going to make a new heavens, the sky, the heavens above. How high up into the atmosphere, I have no idea. I understand that fire can't exist without oxygen, so I guess we can't go too high outside of the atmosphere. I don't know. But they've got this very literally right here. And but let's read the text. For instance, in 2 Peter 3, verses 10 through 12, he says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up." You look at verse 12. "Looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat." It's a little bit of a repeat of what he said in verse 10 right there. But notice that you've got the heavens and the earth expressed right here. So you got one thing you have to understand is that heaven and earth terminology, whether it's in the Old Testament or in the New Testament, does not have to have the words right next to each other like I just said it to you, heavens and earth. You could be earth and heavens for that matter. In fact, Moses reverses that in Genesis, the 2nd chapter. He talks about the earth and the heavens. But it means the exact same thing. Heavens and earth and heavens. But sometimes in some areas, and I'm going to show them to you tonight, in some passages of Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, you've got the words divided up a little bit. Like you've got it right here. This is very typical Old Testament style of speaking. This is the type of Hebraic metaphor that Peter, who is writing to a Jewish audience, by the way, you can see that at the beginning of his epistle right here, they would have understand what he meant by this phrase, earth and heaven, or heaven and earth. He says in verse 10, "In which the heavens," now he's got words, "will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up." This is a heavens and earth motif. The question then becomes, are we talking about the actual physical planet, the carbon-based planet? Are we talking about the planet itself, going nuclear or something, worldwide, just the whole surface burning up, or are we talking about the entire planet being destroyed? Because that's the word we've got right here. The elements will be destroyed, for instance. Now, see that word elements right there? It's the word stoicheia in Greek. He uses it here. He uses it over in verse 12 as well. I don't want to get into a big issue about this right now because I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a study with you through 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter. We're going to go into this in some detail, but I want to do it after we're done with explaining to you and laying the foundation of how this phrase, the heavens and the earth, is used in the Old Testament and into the New Testament. But that word stoicheia right there, elements is a good translation. Now the word stoicheia, nowhere in the Bible, listen very carefully to me, okay, about this, and you're going to need to check me about this. Nowhere in the Bible, nowhere, anywhere, is the word stoicheia, and it's used in several places, but nowhere where it is used does it ever mean anything physical. It's never talking about anything like dirt, rocks, trees, the planet. That it never has that meaning. The meaning of stoicheia, and you look this up in any lexicon you want, Thayer's, Art and Gingrich, you can check it out in Kittle's, I always recommend that, Loeneida, any number, Liddell and Scott, any number of good reputable Greek lexicons, and you're going to find them telling you that the word stoicheia means basic foundations. It means the beginnings of things. Foundations, like the ABCs of a thing. Basic bedrock understanding of philosophy, of mathematics, and even religion. You're going to find that in the lexicons. That's the way this word works right here. And that's exactly the way Peter meant for it to be used. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere in the New Testament does the word stoicheia ever have a meaning of physicality, carbon-based, earth, rocks, trees, nothing like that. It just does not exist. And yet, if you look at most commentators that are futuristic instead of biblical preterist, they will be telling you pretty much that, yeah, well, this is saying that the planet itself is going to be destroyed. It's going to pass away with a roar, verse 10. It's going to be destroyed with intense heat. The earth and its works will be burned up. That's some pretty violent language, isn't it? Verse 12. the heavens will be destroyed by burning. The stoicheia, the elements, will melt with intense heat. Well, I've already shown you, then you're going to need to verify this. Always verify that stoicheia never has the meaning of physicality, something physically burning up. It's always the basics. It's always the ABCs. It is the foundations, the beginnings of a thing, okay? A philosophy, religion, government, that sort of a thing. That's the way the word is used, and that's the way the apostles use it. Paul likes that word stoicheia. He uses it in Galatians. He uses it in Colossians. If you've got an Englishman's Greek concordance, see, when you listen to me, I'm giving you tools. I'm talking to you about tools that you can use, you yourself can use, to find out whether Dr. Birks is, on his last legs brain-wise here or not, or if he's telling you the truth, okay? You get yourself an Englishman's Greek concordance. That's a concordance that has the Greek words laid out within the passages where you find them, and you can actually see where all of this, like this word stoicheia, shows up in these various passages. And then you can cross-reference that with a lexicon, as well as possibly maybe some Greek word study helps, like A.T. Robertson's word pictures in the Greek New Testament, or the New International Greek Text Commentary, or Expositor's Greek New Testament, or Vincent's word studies. See, I'm not just trying to fill time here, because I got lots to do. I'm trying to help you, and I'm trying to make suggestions to you. Now, just because I give you the names of these men and their works doesn't mean that we hold them up as the absolute standard of all truth. But what they are is they help us get a handle on a book that was not written to us. It was preserved for us. You've got it in your hand right now. So do the folks here at Messiah. It was preserved for us, but it was not written to us. And guess what? The New Testament was written in Greek. The New Testament was written in Greek. Old Testament was written in Hebrew. All Bible teachers must absolutely, without question, be able to work in Hebrew and Greek. If they can't, don't listen to them. Do not listen to them, because all the cults do that. I could give you examples, but it'd get us down on a rabbit trail. This is critical stuff right now. So I'm trying to be upright with you in regards to these things. So don't get all upset with me unless you're going to check these things out that we're talking about in regards to all of this. So here, the futurists have got 2 Peter 3, verse 10, verse 12, being the literal earth burning up. Well, but now we've got a problem. If that's true, then follow me over to Ecclesiastes and the 1st chapter and the 4th verse. Because if the earth is going to blow up, melt with intense heat, if that's what that means, if it's going to be destroyed, then we've got something called a contradiction. In fact, I refer to these things as working contradictions. If that is true, if that's the meaning of 2 Peter 3, verse 10, verse 12. You look at Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 4, and he says here, a generation goes, that's a generation of people, right? And a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Sun rises, sun sets, hastening to its place, so on and so forth. The earth remains forever. And this is not the only place that talks about this. You slip on back to the book of Psalms now, and you look at the 104th Psalm, for instance. The 104th Psalm in the 5th verse. 104th Psalm, 5th verse says that God, He has established the earth upon its foundations so that it will not totter forever. The Hebrew there means to move out of place. The earth has been established upon foundations, so it will not totter, will not move out of place. That's a Hebraism for it will not change. Now, I know some people want to say right away, well, wait a minute, what about the Noahic flood? I mean, the earth was destroyed. The earth was not destroyed. There was some topical upheaval, but it was the same planet that was used again. Once the waters dried up and dissipated off the face of the earth and they gathered themselves back into the oceans, is the exact same earth that was reused. Exact same earth. It didn't go anywhere. It wasn't remade or anything like that. No. That's a problem. What about Psalm 148 and verse 6? 148 and verse 6. where he says, he has also established them, that is, the sun, the moon, the stars, the highest heavens, the waters that are above the heavens. That's an interesting thought. That's in verses 3 and 4 and so on. He has established them forever and ever. He has made a decree which will not pass away. He's established them forever and ever. Oh, we've got a problem, don't we? And there's others, by the way. There's Psalm 78, verse 69. You can write it down. Psalm 78, verse 69. There's also Psalm 119 and verse 90. These are all saying the same thing. But that Ecclesiastes 1:4, the earth abides forever. It's not going anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. Matter of fact, there is no text. Outside of that, 2 Peter 3, verse 10, verse 12, which we'll deal with later. We're actually going to be dealing with it tonight. Because once you understand the meaning of heavens and earth, you're going to go, oh, okay, that's talking about something entirely different. It's not a literalistic Greco-Roman cosmology that's going on right here. This is talking about something else. In the same way as in 2 Peter 3, verse 10, verse 12, where he sticks that word stoicheia for elements right in the middle of both of those. Now it makes sense, since stoicheia never, ever has to do with anything physical. Dirt, rocks, trees, the carbon-based planet, never, ever, never, ever does it in the New Testament. Since it has nothing to do with that, but it does have to do with foundations of a society, foundations of economics, the ABCs of religion, philosophy, and that kind of a thing. Then once we start to understand what the identity of the heavens and the earth is, well, that word stoicheia makes total sense. You see, ladies and gentlemen, like I've said to you before, and I will keep saying it to you, as long as you are a futurist, as long as you do not believe Jesus and the apostles' teaching about the timing of his second coming being at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, in that generation, that some of you standing here will not die till you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom with power and glory, as long as you hold to some futuristic thing, you will constantly be having to reinterpret the Bible. You will constantly be having to change what the text says in order to satisfy your predisposition, your presupposition, your prejudice. Christians are the most prejudiced people on the planet. I'm not talking about ethnicity. I'm talking about their prejudice towards what the Bible means when it talks about things like the second coming, the timing of it, and that they're still looking forward to it. That's a prejudice or a presupposition that ruins your ability to understand what the Word means by what it says. And so when we consider things like this, we want to first talk about, let's go right back into the Old Testament, and let's talk about the first occurrence of this phrase, the heavens and the earth. Now, one thing I want you to understand as you make your way to the first chapter of Genesis with me, one of the things I want you to understand is this. Just because I have laid out a scenario here where in certain contexts, the phrase heaven and earth means a foundation of philosophy, beginnings of religion, things along these lines, maybe government, depends on the context. That doesn't mean that the phrase heavens and earth is never used in regards to physicality, because sometimes it is. It all depends upon the context that you find the phrase in and what the meaning is right there. You look at Genesis, the first chapter. What's the first thing out of the gate in the first verse? In the beginning, God created what? The heavens and the earth. And then we get 5 days. We get 5 days, 5 24-hour periods, where he's expressing how that he is making bara out of nothing. That's the Hebrew word for create there. Bara means out of nothing. He is making bara, and then after the lump is there, the lump of creation is there, he talks about yatsar, he talks about molding it, asa, shaping it, this sort of a thing. Like a guy who's got a fresh bunch of clay on the wheel and he's forming it into a pot or whatever he's working on right there. But the text talks about 5 days worth of him saying, rebuking the darkness, separating the light from the darkness, calls the light day and the darkness night. Evening and morning are day one, the first day, and then the second day he's separating the waters from the waters below, from the waters down below and from above, and he's spreading out the seas. He's got the water. That's the second day. Then he's got the waters gathered together, and here comes the vegetation and the plant life and all the fruits bearing seed and food. That's the third day. Then you get into the fourth day, starting in the 14th verse, and it talks about him creating the lights, the sun, the moon, the stars. And now we have the beginning of a calendar on the fourth day. Without the sun, moon, and the stars, you couldn't track time. You couldn't regulate time. And that's what's happening on the fourth day. On the fourth day, we've got that happening. And then on the fifth day, he's got swarms of living creatures in the sky. Birds are appearing. Great sea monsters in the waters and fish. There's your fifth day. But when you get down to the sixth day, and obviously all that is physical, isn't it? Sure, all that is physical, not a problem. But just before we deal with with the sixth day, look at chapter 2 and verse 1 of Genesis. Chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, thus, it's a conclusionary statement, thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. Heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. Look down to verse 4. Verse 4. This is the account, or the making, of the heavens and the earth, when they were created, in the day the Lord God made earth and heaven. See how he reverses it right there. Remember I talked to you about that? It's talking about the same thing. He's just reversed the word. There's nothing mystical in regards to that. But I want you to focus in on 2:1. He says, conclusionary, thus the heavens and the earth were completed. Now when it comes to day 6 and God making man, there's something that goes on with the phrase, the heavens and the earth, which we dare not bypass. Notice it with me now. There's something more that's going on than just simply forming Adam out of the red clay of the ground. Because Adam basically means red clay. And it's translated man and then transliterally Adam or Adam as well. But there's something that goes on that God does with Adam that's beyond just the physicality of the creation. If you look at verse 26, he says, then God said, let us make man in our image. He's speaking to the Godhead. God is speaking to himself. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them, what does your Bible say? Rule. Let them rule. Over what? Over creation, the fish of the sea, birds of the sky, cattle, over the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God, 27, created man in his own image. Because God is a ruler, is he not? And so he assigns to Adam, assigns to man, rulership under his hand, under his direction. Because to be made in the image of God means to exercise authority. It's a foundation. It's a rulership. God is entering into a unilateral covenant with man, and it has to do with ruling under God because man is made in God's image. See, God's image doesn't mean anything physical. God doesn't. John 4:24, Jesus said God is spirit. Deuteronomy 4:12, Deuteronomy 4:15, 4:12 and 4:15 of Deuteronomy both state that God has no form. God has no form. Jesus said it. God is spirit. He has no form. There's nothing to see. And so in John 4:12 and 4:15, he is warning them, therefore, because God has no form, but you have an imagination, don't start making God into some kind of an image, because that's a blasphemy. That's the expression of idolatry. But when he says here that he's making man in his image, then what does man do? Is man told to make an image of God? No. Is man told that you look, God says, you look just like me? No. Because there's nothing physical to look at. But when he talks about the image, he's talking about exercising authority. He's talking about ruling. He's talking about taking authority and ruling under God's hand as being in the image of God over the creation, right? And then verse 28, God blessed them, meaning Adam and Eve, said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, birds of the sky, every living thing that moves on the earth. Now, chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all of its hosts. Unless you have man exercising rulership over the stoicheia. You do not have a heavens and earth being completed. In other words, part of the heavens and earth being completed has to do with rulership. It has to do with God ruling through man under a covenant. And that's the essential aspect and understanding of the phrase the heavens and earth. I hope you're following me in regards to this, because from this point on, as it begins to open up more and more, you have to keep this Genesis lesson in mind. The more God talks about phraseology, which you will see has heavens and earth language in it, I'm going to show it to you, but can never ever be physical. You'll see that in the context. The only thing that will help you to understand this is to understand that on the sixth day, when God made Adam in God's image, part of that being in God's image has to do with ruling over God's creation. That's the stoicheia. That's the basic foundation. That's the ABC. That's the ABC of philosophy, of religion. That's the ABC of ruling. So on and so forth. So let me give you some fast examples. All the way back to Isaiah with me. Isaiah the 13th chapter this time. Isaiah the 13th chapter. And when he speaks in the 13th chapter, starting at verse 1, he starts speaking about Babylon. And he's going to speak about Babylon and its heavens and its earth, as well as its sun, moon, and stars. Notice how he uses that phrase. Whether he's talking to the people of Israel, or he's talking to God speaking to his chosen people or not, his elect people, or whether he's talking to a non-elect nation, he still uses that same language, that same motif in regards to people who are in governments as being in a heavens and an earth. So 13:1 of Isaiah says the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw. Now I want you to see verse 1, because I want you to see he's addressing his comments to Babylon. Now slip down to verse 9. That never changes. All the way down to verse 9. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with fury and burning anger. It's talking about when the Medes and the Persians come in and destroy Babylon. You can read about that in Daniel. Cruel and with fury, burning anger, to make the land a desolation. He will exterminate its sinners from it. Now watch what's about to happen. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises. The moon will not shed its light. Now the context is talking about destroying Babylon. And he refers to destroying Babylon, Isaiah does, using Hebraic metaphorical speech. He's using Jewish slang. But it's not just slang for slang's sake. Because over in, just write it down. Over in Genesis 37, verses 9 and 10, Genesis 37, 9 and 10, Joseph has a dream, one of Jacob's sons. He has a dream, and he says that the sun and the moon and all the stars were bowing down to me. And then Dad, Jacob, he interprets the dream for his son, and he says to him, What? What are you talking about? Listen now. He says, shall I and your mother and your brothers bow down to you? Ah, that's the first occurrence of that phrase, sun, moon, and stars. And it's in direct reference to guess who? To Israel, to the nation of Israel. And it's used that way throughout the Old and the New Testament. It's the way Jesus uses it in the Olivet Discourse. Remember, I'm getting you ready so we can take a verse-by-verse journey through the Olivet Discourse with understanding. But we're not there yet. We're not ready to jump into it yet. But we're getting there, okay? That's what it means when you get over to the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation. And it speaks about this woman, who is standing in the sun. And her feet are on the moon. And the 12 stars are surrounding her. It's a picture of Israel. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 11, I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put, now the world here is the world of the Babylonians. That's your context. Not the world in general, it's the world of the Babylonians. The wicked for their iniquity, put an end to the arrogance of the proud, abase the haughtiness of the ruthless, make a mortal man scarcer than pure gold, mankind than the gold of Ophir. Now watch verse 13. Isaiah 13:13. Therefore, conclusion now, I mean, he's wiping out Babylon, right? Therefore, I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place at the fury of the Lord of hosts in the day of his burning anger. You see it? The heavens and earth of the Babylonians is going away. What does it mean, the heavens and the earth? Their ability to rule. There is not going to be a heavens and earth Babylon government anymore. It's going away. Just like God assigned to Adam in Genesis 1:26 through 28, who is made in the image of God and therefore must rule over God's creation. See, that was the Adamic government there in the garden. Well, that was blown, of course, in Genesis 3, and now he's using the same language here, the same heavens and earth language here, to talk about the destruction of the government of the Babylonians. Isn't that fascinating, the way that works? If you slip all the way over to Haggai, it's one of the minor prophets, near the back of the book, right after Zephaniah, right between Zephaniah and Zechariah. Right between Zephaniah and Zechariah, you'll find the little 2-chapter book of Haggai. Haggai. And Haggai is a prophet that is ministering during the rebuilding of what later became known as the Herodian Temple, or the second temple that was rebuilt after the members of the Jews came out of Babylonian bondage. After the 70-year captivity, they've come back. Now they're rebuilding the temple, they're rebuilding the city, and this sort of a thing. And he uses this language, Haggai uses this heavens and earth language in regards to the coming of Christ. In regards to the coming of Christ. Watch what he says right here. Haggai, the 2nd chapter. And he's talking about the temple, by the way. Remember, I have said to you before that in Matthew 24 and verse 34, where Jesus says, after he concludes and talks about the destruction of the temple, and he says that heaven and earth will pass away. Remember that? Has everything to do with the temple. And I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to read to you. I brought some books tonight. I'm going to read to you out of Josephus, where Josephus, who was a Jewish historian alive during the 1st century, speaks about how the temple was referred to as the heavens and the earth. He's just using language that Jesus and all the prophets used. Haggai, 2nd chapter, verse 3 says, "Who is left among you who saw this temple in its former glory?" Okay, I want you to see that. That context doesn't change. Look down to verse 6. Verse 6, "For thus says the Lord of hosts, once more in a little while, I am going to shake the heavens and the earth." I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. Now he interprets what he means by shaking the heavens and the earth. "I will shake all the nations," rulership. "They will come with the wealth of all the nations, and I will fill this house with my glory." In all likelihood, it's speaking about Christ coming in his first coming, and actually physically being in this rebuilt temple. He's going to shake all the nations to make this happen. And he refers to it as the heavens and the earth. Now, go a little bit further in the 2nd chapter of Haggai. Go down to the 21st and the 22nd verse. Haggai 2, 21 and 22. He says, God says, "Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah," at the time when they all came back out of Babylonian bondage, saying, "I am going to shake the heavens and the earth." Now, verse 22 tells us what he means by that. I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. 22, "I will overthrow the thrones of kingdoms." That's what it means to shake the heavens and the earth. So it's talking about people in other kingdoms. He's going to shake their governments. He's going to overthrow their thrones, he says. "I will destroy the power of the kingdoms of the nations. I will overthrow the chariots," that's their military, "their riders," that's their soldiery, "the horses and their riders will go down, everyone by the sword of another." Why do nations send forth their armies? So they can take over the governments of other people. So they can start ruling over other people. It's a change of the heavens and the earth. See, it's the same use of the phrase that was originally done back in Genesis 1, verse 26 and 28. And yet there's more on top of this. Slip with me back to Isaiah again, this time the 51st chapter. Isaiah the 51st chapter. In this wild, Isaiah 51, and let's note together, let's start at verse 4 and go through 6. Isaiah 51 verses 4 through 6. He says, "Pay attention to me, O my people, and give ear to me, O my nation." Now watch. "For a law will go forth from me." Remember I told you that heavens and earth has the meanings. It has sometimes in the context, it'll have a meaning of physicality. It has a meaning of that which is created. But it also has to do with laws, philosophies, the ABCs, the foundations of a people group. Could have to do with economics, national rulership, government, that kind of thing. Okay. "For a law will go forth from me. I will set my justice for a light of the peoples. My righteousness is near. My salvation has gone forth, and my arms will judge the peoples. The coastlands will wait for me, and for my arm they will wait expectantly." Now watch this. Verse 6. "Lift up your eyes to the heavens. Then look to the earth." That's a heavens and earth motif. "Lift up your eyes to the heavens, then look to the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants will die in like manner." You say, "Well, Pastor, that sounds like physicality to me right there. It sounds like people are going to die in a literal physical heavens and earth." All right? Well, look at verse 16 now. Verse 16. God says, "I have put my words in your mouth and have covered you with the shadow of my hand to establish or plant the heavens, to found the earth, and to say to Zion, you are my people." Notice that the heavens and the earth language has to do with, top of 16, words that he has put, in this case, Isaiah's mouth. It's the words that are in Isaiah's mouth. He has covered them with the shadow of his hand to establish or plant the heavens through the use of words. That's covenantal language. To found the earth and to say to Zion, you are my people. In other words, it's the heavens and earth covenant agreement that establishes that the people he's talking to here, it's Israel, are God's people, as long as his words are in their mouth, and because of having his words in their mouth, he then speaks his word, the words, which is the reference to law in verse 4, by the way. And as that is spoken, the heavens and the earth are established, planted, or founded. And their identity goes forth as Zion, bottom of 16, Zion, you are my people. Now, if you look back at verse 6, where he says, lift up your eyes to the heavens, look to the earth beneath, for the earth will the heavens will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants will die in like manner. It's in reference to the law of verse 4. Pay attention to me, my people, give ear to me, O my nation, for a law will go forth from me, and I will set my justice for a light for the peoples. Lift up your eyes to the heavens. Look to the law, he's saying, and to the earth, heavens and earth. Look to the law. It's that which rules. It's that which is established. For the heavens will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment. All right, as he is established in verse 16, it's God's words that come out of his mouth that he puts into our mouths that establishes the heavens and the earth. When that is removed, and you have it removed here in verse 6, the heavens will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants will die in like manner. What's being talked about here is the removal of the old heavens and the earth, or the law of the old covenant. Now the writer to the Hebrews quotes from this. Back in Hebrews, the first chapter, looking at verse 10. Hebrews, the first chapter, noting verse 10. He says in Hebrews 1:10, and you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Remember, we read that in Genesis. We read it in Genesis, the first chapter. We read it as a conclusionary in Genesis 2, verse 1 right there, right? But on the sixth day, when he made Adam, and he established the heavens and the earth, he did it through raising them up by establishing them under the authority that he gives them, because they're made in God's image, to rule over the planet, over the beasts, over the fish of the sea, over the animals and the birds of the sky, and that kind of a thing. And he says, in the beginning now, in the beginning, as he quotes out of Psalm 102, by the way, in the beginning you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will become old like a garment. Is that physical? Because Ecclesiastes 1:4 says, the earth abides forever. And Psalm 104 and Psalm 119 and Psalm 148, as we looked at those passages. The earth isn't going anywhere. So what's he talking about here? They will perish, verse 11, but you will remain. They will become old like a garment, like a mantle. You will roll them up like a garment. They will also be changed. That's alasso in Greek. Alasso. Exchange. Alasso. Exchange for what? They will be exchanged. But you are the same. Your years will not come to an end. What's he talking about here? Well, in the context here of Hebrews, it's talking about the old covenant being fulfilled and going away, and the new covenant being established. The book of Hebrews, just like the book of Revelation, is basically about one theme. It's about out with the old and in with the new. It's about covenants. Slip over to Isaiah 65. And you'll be familiar with this. Isaiah 65, verse 17. He says, for behold, in Isaiah 65:17, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. Now watch, create. He just said in 17 he's creating a new heavens and a new earth. Yes? And in 18 he says, be glad and rejoice forever over what I create. Now he says what it is he's going to create. What he means by heavens and earth. For behold, I create what? Jerusalem. Jerusalem for rejoicing, and her people for gladness. So the new heavens and the new earth are this Jerusalem. What is this Jerusalem that he's talking about right here? Well, let's see the fulfillment of it. Revelation, the 21st chapter. Revelation, the 21st chapter, quotes directly here from Isaiah 65 and verse 17. Now, Isaiah 65, verse 17, talks about him creating the new heavens and the new earth, and that he is creating Jerusalem a joy, a place of gladness. What is this Jerusalem? Are we to understand this as literal? Or does the book of Revelation say this? Does the book of Revelation in the 21st chapter define for us what this Jerusalem is that Isaiah is talking about in the 65th chapter? We'll look at Revelation 21 and verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. Is that physical? Ecclesiastes 1:4 says what? The earth abides forever. Psalm 104, Psalm 119, Psalm 148. We looked at them all. I gave you references. This earth's not going anywhere. I've taken you back into Genesis, the first chapter. We've talked about the sixth day, the making of man in God's image, which mandated that the heavens and the earth be understood there as including the ability to rule and reign. We've talked about 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter, verse 10, verse 12, where he uses the word stoicheia, which is translated as elements, which has to do with governments, the ability to reign, rule. It has to do with covenants. It's the basic foundation of religion, the ABCs of philosophy, and so on and so forth. That's the meaning of the word stoicheia, right? So if the heavens and the earth pass away, what is passing away here? Now remember, something else you got to remember too. In Revelation, the 1st chapter, Revelation, the 22nd chapter, talks about remember those bookends I've pointed out to you before, that all that was going to take place was going to take place now. Dakos. It was going to be now, immediately. It was going to happen soon. Egus. It was going to be as near as your hand, at hand. all these things that are in here. So if the heavens and the earth here are supposed to be physical, well, it clearly didn't happen, did it? Of course not. Well, what's this talking? See, if we use the Bible, if we use the Old Testament as our referent, as our defining tool for what a phrase like the heavens and the earth means, or sun, moon, and stars, like I gave you out of its original occurrence in Genesis 37, verses 9 and 10, when we do that and we see the consistency, and I showed it to you in Genesis, I showed it to you several times in Isaiah, we looked at it in Haggai, for instance. Now we're slipping over into the New Testament. Now there's other places where it shows up, but now we're slipping over into the New Testament. And he's using that exact same kind of language, speaking Hebraically. These are Jewish men and women who are hip to the trip. They got the slang down and they know what it means. Jesus spoke the exact same way. Now look at this. I saw, Revelation 21:1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there's no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. Now just before I deal with that, well, I better deal with it now. Remember over in Isaiah 65, verse 17, verse 18, how it talks about how I'm creating a new heaven and a new earth, and I create what? Jerusalem, a place of joy and that kind of a thing. And here, one right after the other, he says, new heavens and new earth, verse 1, verse 2, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming out of heaven as a bride. So the new heavens and the new earth are directly tied in with this New Jerusalem. Now hang on a second. Back up to Revelation 20 and look at verse 11. Revelation 20 and verse 11. He says, John says, and I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, that's Christ, because all judgment has been given over to Christ. This is John chapter 5. From whose presence, watch this, from whose presence the earth and heaven fled away, and there was no place found for them. That's the old covenant. Earth and heaven and earth fled away. No place found for them. That's done. Remember in Matthew 5, verse 17 and 18? Remember Matthew 5, 17 and 18? He talks about the fact that not one jot or tittle of the law will pass away till all is fulfilled. Heaven and earth would pass away, but my words would not pass away. You remember that? Now you have a better understanding of what he meant right there, of heavens and earth. He's talking about the law, even in the context. Not one, verse 17 of Matthew 5, not one jot or tittle of the law will pass away until it's all fulfilled. Luke 24, verse 44 and 45, on the day of Christ's resurrection, Jesus appears to the boys in the upper room and he says, I have fulfilled all that was written about me in the law, the Psalms and the prophets. Every jot and tittle was fulfilled. And then in Matthew 5, 17 and 18, in 18, he says, heaven and earth, they go, go, go. Because he's talking about the law right there. Well, now you look at Revelation 20. By the way, John was standing right there listening to Christ when Christ said that. And in John 20, or rather Revelation 20 and verse 11, I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose presence the earth and the heaven fled away. And there was no place found for them. There's no place found for the law. It's fulfilled. And so you look down at 21, you see new heaven and new earth taking place. And the holy city, New Jerusalem, just like Isaiah 51. I apologize. 65, 17, and 18 talks about. It says, I see the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. Look down at verse 9. Verse 9. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and spoke to me, saying, come here, and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Who's that?
The church.
Yeah. Sure. It's the church. Of course it is. Verse 10, and he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain. By the way, Micah 4:1 has the church on a great high mountain. So does Isaiah 2. The church is a great high mountain. That's Hebraism. And he showed me, verse 10, the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. Coming down out of heaven means that it originates in heaven. holy city, New Jerusalem, it's not some cube. You know, people in their literalistic nonsense, they start taking the descriptions here that are all Hebraisms and the measurements that start taking place, in verse 16, 17, and all of that. It's this giant cube. And they actually think that it's this incredible cube perversion that comes out of heaven and just sits on the earth. It's talking about the church. And he calls it the bride, the wife of the Lamb, the holy city, New Jerusalem. And we just got through reading in Isaiah 65, verse 17 and verse 18, that the new heavens and the new earth that he creates, he's creating Jerusalem, a place of joy. It's the church, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the only place this is. It's in Galatians 4 as well. Important to understand this stuff. Well, that's plenty of that right there, okay? Now I want to do a little something for you. At this point, I want to take the balance of our time, and the balance of our time is however long I want it to be. But in any case, I want to talk to you about some secondary sources for this material. Am I the only one that sees this? I am so glad to say that there have been so many in the church, so many men and women, scholars throughout the history of the church that have always believed this. People think that, well, I've never heard of preterism before. What do you mean Jesus has already come back? And they got this shocked look. But you go back into the time of the Reformation and even prior to that, or even prior to the 2nd century, and they were all looking for the Lord Jesus. They would have said, in the 1st century, prior to AD 70, just like it talks about in 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter, the mockers that came. If you had talked about the fact that prior, after the temple was blown away, or something like that, before the middle of the 2nd century, and you were talking about this future stuff, they would have thought you were crazy. They would have thought that you were crazy. The whole church knew in the 1st century, AD 66, that when the army of Rome showed up and Cestus Gallus pulled away at the last second, and the Christians left Jerusalem, headed north to Pella, what were they doing? They were obeying and believing the teaching of Christ and the apostles in the Olivet Discourse. When he told them, when you see Jerusalem, Luke 21:20, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, run. Don't go back into the city and get your clothes. Just run. And historically, we know they all ran north into Pella. I was just reading Philip Schaff's History of the Christian Church, Volume 1, today, where he talks about that very thing. Tacitus, the Roman historian, talks about that. Josephus, speaking of which, he talks about that as well. And all those people, what do you think was going on? They were believing the Lord Jesus. They were looking for it. They weren't going, it's thousands of years away. It's 2,000-3,000 years away. Let's not worry about it. This is something else entirely. Absolutely not. To a man, the Christians left Jerusalem. Why? Because they believed the Lord. That's why Peter had to jump on the people whom he called mockers, who were mocking in 2 Peter 3, verses 1 through 3, saying, where's the promise of his coming? The mockers were going, where's the promise of his coming? And Peter says anybody that does that is a mocker. Now, if it was mocking back then, what is it now? To deny his 1st century second coming, what is it now, if not mocking? Heavens and earth. Josephus, which is my copy is pretty well used, Josephus says it's the temple. So when Jesus says in conclusion, in the Olivet Discourse, as he's talking about the destruction of the temple, the heaven and the earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Heaven and earth, the temple, that's temporary, it's going. Because that's what the boys asked at the very beginning. When will these things happen? After Jesus said, not one stone will be left upon another, till they're all thrown down. That was fulfilled literally, as the Roman army dug up with their machines all the foundation stones at the temple because of the intense heat of the fire and all the gold that was melting off the temple and running down into the cracks. They were after that gold. And they fulfilled that to the T, to the letter. The heavens and the earth. It's the temple. Now I'm not going to read everything here to you, but I'm looking at the section of Josephus which is called Antiquities of the Jews. Antiquities of the Jews. And I'm not sure which chapter this is. Let me see here. This is Book 3, Chapter 7, starting at paragraph 7. And he says this, "Now here one may wonder at the ill will which men bear to us. Josephus, he was in the priestly line. He was also a general in the army of Judea. He was captured, and eventually he became Vespasian's interpreter, helped him to try to get the Jews to surrender and this kind of a thing. And his history is an eyewitness history. He says, "Now here one may wonder at the ill will which men bear to us, which they profess to bear on account of our despising that deity which they pretend to honor. For if any one do but consider," listen now, "the fabric of the tabernacle," he's going to talk about what the heavens and the earth is now, "and take a view of the garments of the priest, and those vessels which make use of in our sacred ministration, he will find that our legislator was a divine man, and that we are unjustly reproached by others. Now, for if any one do without prejudice and without judgment, look upon these things, he will find that were every one made in a way of imitation and representation of the universe." When Moses distinguished the tabernacle into 3 parts, and allowed 2 of them to the priests as a place accessible and common, he denoted the land and the sea, these being of general access to all, but he set apart the 3rd division for God, that would be the Holy of Holies, because heaven is inaccessible to man. He calls the Holy of Holies heaven. He calls the part that is acceptable the land and the sea. That's the heavens and the earth. And when he ordered 12 loaves to set on the table, he denoted the year as distinguished into so many months. By branching out the candlestick into 70 parts, he secretly intimated the decani, or the 70 divisions of the planets. Where's he getting this? And as to the 7 lamps upon the candlestick, the menorah, they referred to, of course, the course of the planets, of which that is the number. The veils, too, which were composed of 4 things. They declared the 4 elements. For the fine linen was proper to signify the earth, because the flax grows out of the earth. The purple signified the sea, because that is the color that is dyed by the blood of a seashell fish. The blue is to signify the air. There's your heavens. The scarlet will naturally be an indicator of fire. Now the vestment of the high priest, being made of linen, signified the earth. The blue denoted the sky, or the heavens, being like lightning in its pomegranates, and in the noise of the bells resembling thunder. He also appointed the breastplate to be placed in the middle of the ephod to resemble the earth. And he goes on. I'm trying to move along right here. He talks about this as the heavens and the earth. For the mitre which the high priest wore, the blue of color, it seems to mean the heaven. For how otherwise could the name of God be inscribed upon it? Because Yahweh's name was on that mitre. So you can see, just by reading that Josephus understands in the 1st century that the aspects of the tabernacle, as he is describing it, which then transferred into the temple, was the temple was a representation. When you got into the outer courts, for instance, and then the court of the Levites, the priests, where the sacrifice went on, and then the holy place, the first court, where of course was the menorah, the 7-branch candlestick, and where there was the table of showbread and the altar of incense, and then there was a veil wherein only once a year the high priest would go in on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat, the Holy of Holies. That was known as heaven. Everything else was earth. So in other words, it came to be known as the temple was the place where heaven and earth met. This is where God meets man on the earth. And the symbolism was all about that. See? This is what Josephus has to say about that. Let me keep going here. I haven't got very many to read to you, just a few. Here's a book called The Temple. Now, this is a more modern book. It's written by a Jewish fella by the name of Berman. The Temple, easy to get on Amazon.com. Joshua Berman wrote this, and he says something very interesting along the same lines as what we were just talking about out of Josephus. Now, what am I doing right now? I'm showing you that there are varied aspects of opinion from Jewish writings as well as from Gentile writings historically, and I can't bring them all in here. I'm just making selections out of my library to make a point that this understanding of the heavens and the earth is not about physical. That as the Jews used that phraseology, it had to do with type and metaphor. It had to do with the temple, had to do with their ceremony, had to do with their religion. And in some cases, the phrase, like in regards to Isaiah 13, was used in regards to the government of Babylon, and that their sun, moon, and stars was going to be thrown down. Their heavens and earth was going to be thrown down. But now here's something out of page 16 of Joshua Berman on the temple. He says this, quote, "When God tells Moses that Bezalel is to oversee the tabernacle works, he says, quote, 'See, I have singled out Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. I have endowed him with a divine spirit of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in every kind of craft,' close quote, Exodus 31, verses 2 through 3. As we assumed previously, the presence of terminology from one biblical section in another may be seen as intended to elucidate the meaning of that passage. So, comparing Scripture with Scripture. When the author of Proverbs borrows terminology that, in another context, describes Bezalel's creative capacities and ascribes those same virtues to God as he created the universe, it may be read as a statement that Bezalel's creation of the tabernacle is tantamount to God's creation of the universe. Well, this is exactly what we just got through reading in Josephus. That's what Josephus is saying. Bezalel was one of the men, of course, that God endued with wisdom and knowledge, that as Moses gave him the information that God gave to Moses, how to put the tabernacle together, how to weave things together, how to build the furniture and this sort of a thing, that it was a representation of the creation. Now listen to this. Berman says this next. These parallels are reflected in the Talmud's statement that, listen, Bezalel knew how to create the heavens and the earth. Stuff is not done in a corner somewhere. I mean, it's out there. Most Christians don't know anything about it because most Christians are too interested in, you think we're in the last days? You think Jesus is coming back? Who do you think the Antichrist is? And we're filling seat after seat after seat in these conferences, and guys are running around with their, giant PowerPoint presentations and whatnot, all kinds of 10-headed beasties, and stuff from the book of Revelation, and one world government, and could it be this, and 666. Ain't going to be no mark, my friends. The mark already took place. You should just listen in to our studies on Revelation. Revelation 3.0 on Sunday mornings. I'm back into it again this coming Sunday. What's the date today?
19th of November.
November 19th, 2013, because I don't know when you're watching this, but we're going through Revelation right now. When we get into those places, it talks about 666. It has nothing to do with some kind of a tattoo literally going on your hand or on your forehead. This is about rightly dividing the word of truth and using the Hebraic terminology of the Old Testament that Jesus and the apostles used and were very, very hip to. They knew exactly what these things meant. And so when they wrote these things down to their Jewish audience had no problem understanding it. But us, on the other hand, man, we are serious Johnny-come-latelys. And we need a serious training in biblical hermeneutics. That's the science of interpretation. We need to, and that's what this is all about. It's what I'm talking to you about right now. I'm reading this stuff for you so you begin to see that the Jews understood the phrase heaven and earth not about something physical necessarily, but they used it predominantly having to do with their worship, with their temple, with their ceremonies, with their philosophy, with their religion. Let me give you a quote out of Abraham Cohen's book, Abraham Cohen, called Every Man's Talmud. Every Man's Talmud. This is easy to get. It's from pages 30 and 32. He talks about the heaven and the earth. Now watch how he talks about the heavens first. He says the Bible has 7 different designations for heaven. Now this is a man who is deep into his Talmud. The point being is that he is drawing on the traditions, the Jewish traditions in regards to this subject. So he says there are 7 different designations for heaven. Therefore, there must be 7 heavens. There are 7 heavens named respectively. And then he begins to name them. Vilan, Rakia, Shekakim, Zebul, Moan, Mekon. Zebul is that where the celestial Jerusalem is and the temple in which the altar is erected. So it's that idea of heaven and earth. There is that Zebul where there is that heaven, and in that heaven there is the temple that is in heaven. That's referred to as Zebul. We're going to come across that in the book of Revelation. Remember, God says to Moses, make sure that everything you make on the earth, you make according to the pattern that was shown to you, referencing the temple that is in heaven. And now the earth. He says this on page 31 of Every Man's Talmud. Corresponding to the 7 heavens, the earth also was pictured as consisting of several strata, since there are several different words for it in the Bible. Tradition related that in the temple there was a foundation stone. Listen carefully now. Which was so named because upon it the world was founded, and from this, as a center, the earth was created. So what they're saying is that in the temple, in Jerusalem, there's a foundation stone, and that all creation began right there. There's your earth aspect. Why the temple is referred to as the heavens and the earth. He continues, this legend reflects the view that since the Holy Land was God's chosen country, it must have been first in the creation. Well, there's no Bible for this, but this is their tradition. And because the site of the temple was the most sacred of all placed, the process of creation must have begun there. In other words, this is the spot where earth and heaven met. And he's trying to give you a backdrop here as to one of the reasons why the temple is referred to as the heavens and the earth. But Berman here makes it very clear in regards to his statement that these parallels are reflected in the Talmud statement that Bezalel knew how to create the heavens and the earth. And he was making the furniture of the temple and all that went in there in regards to that. Very fascinating right there, isn't it? I'll give you another one. This is a book by Moses Maimonides. Maimonides, there's an interesting Maimonides. I don't know, Mr. Maimonides, paging Mr. Maimonides. That's a rough last name. Anyway, Moses Maimonides. We're talking about a guy here who has been around. He's the year 1000. I don't have his exact date right here, but he is representing Jewish understanding for the first 1,000 years since the first century. There is a life of Maimonides that is included here at the very beginning, which we're not going to look at. But listen to some of the things that he has to say about the heavens and the earth. He says, besides, it must be borne in mind that every prophet has his own peculiar diction, which is, as it were, his language. You listening to me? And it is in that language that the prophecy addressed to him is communicated to those who understand it. After this preliminary remark, you will understand the metaphor frequently employed by Isaiah and less frequently by the other prophets when they describe the ruin of a kingdom or the destruction of a great nation in phrases like the following, quote, the stars have fallen. Quote, the heavens are overthrown. What's he say this is? He says this is the ruin of a kingdom or the destruction of a great nation. And that these phrases point to that. Quote, the sun is darkened. Quote, the earth is waste and trembles. And similar metaphors, he says. The Arabs likewise say of a person who has met with a serious accident, quote, listen to this, his heavens together with his earth have been covered, close quote. They were talking this way back in the year 1000. And when they speak of the approach of a nation's prosperity, they say, quote, the light of the sun and moon has increased, close quote. Or, quote, a new heaven and a new earth has been created. What? Oh my gosh. Did you know this was around? Y'all know this is? Holy cow. And other passages like that. And he speaks that way for several pages. I'm not going to read any more to you. It just takes up more time. But I highly recommend this. I'm starting to read on page 204 here for this heavens and earth and sun, moon, and stars motif. He goes on talking about the same thing that I've been pointing out to you in Isaiah, in Haggai, and things like that are brought over into the New Testament. You see, this idea of making the heavens and the earth burn up and explode, if that's the direction you're going to take, and you're going to think that this earth, with the coming of Christ and his parousia, that he just, at whatever point, if you're pre-mill, mid-trib, post-mill, I don't know, mill your coffee, mill your bran, or something like that. I mean, where you can see that you're nowhere near understanding, rightly dividing what this Bible means by what it says. Let me give you one more. Here's a book I recommend. Last Days Madness by Gary DeMar. Last Days Madness. A little on the thick side, but there's a lot. If you were to take everything I talked to you about, we've probably hit right about here right now. The thickness of that, if we were to put everything I've talked to you about in a book, I don't know, it might be even bigger than that. But Gary is a Christian brother. He is a first-rate scholar. Now, Gary is what we call a partial preterist. Partial preterist. That means he's not too sure. He's not too sure. Partial preterist. Partial preterist is by far worse than a preterist. You know why? Because the preterist believes in only one second coming. But the partial preterist believes there are three. Yeah. There is the initial coming of the Lord in his humility to die on a cross and be raised from the dead, to be our propitiation on the cross to save us. And then they believe in the second coming part A, which is in AD 70. They believe that that coming was a judgment coming on Jerusalem, but it was not his coming in glory. Even though there are no scriptures that speak about the dividing up of the second coming into two parts, nevertheless, that's what they believe. And you know why they believe that? Because they are credalists. In other words, their commitment is to, in this case, for these guys, Presbyterians, their commitment is to the Westminster Confession of Faith first. Sorry, it is. Otherwise, if they didn't have that, they'd be free to be like me. There's a scary thought. They'd be free to be able to just come to the Scripture's conclusion. But see, these guys are bound up by fear. They don't want to lose their jobs. I know pastors who have talked to me, and they've said, I see exactly what you're saying. The Bible is saying preterism is true, but I can't preach this. Don't you know I'll lose my job? Don't you know they'll kick me right out of here? Well, every man's got to do in accordance with his conscience, but I can't live that way. That's why Messiah Church exists. That's a commercial for another time. But in any case, yeah. And so what they've got is this unbiblical, partial preterist, unbiblical third coming, yet in our future right now. So they believe, obviously, in the first coming of the Lord. And we would share a lot of things similarly when it comes to the Olivet Discourse. Until you get like about halfway through, and then things change all of a sudden, because they just don't want to believe that verses 30, 31, 32, all the way down into 34 right there, that's already taken place, because that clearly describes the second coming. But I've already read those passages to you, and I've already shown you that they have to happen within the lifetime of that generation. Those same people. It has to be that way. And then you get into all kinds of equivocations that start taking place. People have to justify their presuppositions. Presuppositions die hard, okay? But in the meantime, we use what we can in regards to what these guys have to say. I want to read this to you, and I think we're going to wrap it up. On page 488 of his book, Last Days Madness, Dr. DeMar says this: the Old Covenant order in which the entire world was organized around the central sanctuary of the Jerusalem temple. Didn't we just get through reading that in Josephus? Didn't we get through reading that in Moses Maimonides? Didn't we just get through reading that in Berman? The Old Covenant order in which the entire world was organized around the central sanctuary of the Jerusalem temple could quite appropriately be described before its final dissolution as, quote, the present heavens and earth, close quote. And then he quotes from a Puritan writer named John Brown, who was a preterist, a little inconsistently so, because these guys take you right up to the door. You're standing on the doormat of the second coming, and then all of a sudden they rip the mat out from under your feet and they start backpedaling. Guys are such chickens. Listen, who are you going to serve? Decide who you're going to serve. Guys kind of make me sick. I mean, what the heck are you doing? Serve Christ, honor Christ. I guarantee you, when you stand before Christ at the Bema Seat, He's not going to be saying, now did you follow the Westminster Confession? It's not going to happen. Oh, the Bible. Yes, that's the book for me. Here we go, you guys. Sing it. Maybe not. Here's this quote from John Brown. Quote, a person at all familiar with the phraseology of the Old Testament Scriptures, well, see, there's the problem right there. We're not familiar with the phraseology. But a person who is familiar with the phraseology of the Old Testament Scriptures knows that the dissolution of the Mosaic economy and the establishment of the Christian economy is often spoken of as the removing of the old earth and heavens and the creation of a new earth and heavens. The period of the close of the one dispensation and the commencement of the other is spoken of as the last days and the end of the world, and is described as such a shaking of the earth and the heavens as should lead to the removal of the things which were shaken. Haggai 2:6, Hebrews 12:26 through 27, close quote. And that's taken from John Brown, Discourses and Sayings of Our Lord, 3 volumes. I've got those. 3 volumes. And this was actually from volume 1, page 171 to 72. Now he quotes from John Owen, probably the greatest Puritan that ever lived. And if you can read through his works or just get through the death of death and the death of Christ, I owe you a box of cigars. You ladies too. Therefore, says Owen, quote, on this foundation I affirm that the heavens and the earth here intended in this prophecy of Peter, the coming of the Lord, the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men, mentioned in the destruction of that heaven and earth, relate to the utter desolation and destruction that was to be made of the Judaical church and state, close quote. And that's from the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. And that's quoted out of Brown, Discourses and Sayings of the Lord as well, on page 172 of volume 1 of that in particular. And that's about all I want to give you tonight. The problem is, the issue is me scouring through all the material that is out there in regards to this. You might want to see about picking up a volume called The Parousia by Russell. It's about yay thick. When you come and visit Messiah Church this Sunday, we have a book table out on the front, and it's a lending table. I think there's a copy of it out there, The Parousia. It's out there. Okay. We also have Gary DeMars and what's the guy's last name? Gum Up the Works. I forgot. Gummer something or other. I apologize. I don't mean to be crass about it. But anyway, it's called The Church in the Last Days, I think. Or The Church at the End of the World, excuse me. That's a very, very good historical study. The expectation of the people in the first century is very high in regards to the coming of the Lord. Anyway, there's that. There's also E. Hamden Cook. E. Hamden Cook, The Christ Has Already Come. There's lots of material written back in the 1800s, 1700s. It is out there. You know, if anybody cares to look. The classical commentaries on this subject, not the modern stuff, not the stuff that was written in the 1900s when dispensationalism began to have its way throughout the church. But the classical commentaries from the 1800s and the 1900s speak about the fact that this destruction of Jerusalem, when you read through the commentaries of guys like, John Gill, Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown, the classical John Owen, for instance, many, many others, they talk about the fact that this was all fulfilled back from AD 66 to 70. When you read in their commentaries on Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, that's what you're going to find. This is old stuff. Every now, very occasionally, you have a hard time finding somebody who's willing to lose their job, who's willing to, come out from amongst the creedalistic crowd and just stand out there alone. Ladies and gentlemen, standing up in front of you, or in this case sitting, and preaching this stuff with a clear conscience, there is nothing like it. There's nothing like it. And you know what? I've been at this for so many years right now, online, and now we're doing this YouTube. I love this. Nobody has been able to contradict. Nobody. Nobody contradicts. And I'm not talking about contradicting me. I'm talking about contradicting the Scripture, contradicting these historical facts. People just don't do it. I've been putting people to the challenge for years in regards to this subject. And still nobody does it. They're just quiet about it. They don't talk to me. They sit over there and they write their books and stuff. Some of the worst tripe, because it's outside of exegesis. And guys who know better and should know better and have the skills and have the training to be able to do sound exegesis. But those presuppositions, man, they carry you along and they die hard, I'll tell you what. In any case, I think that's it. I think we're done for the night. I think there goes my voice. I need a drink of water. God bless you all. Thank you for listening in. That was installment number 6. Remember, you can tweet me. I can't believe I'm saying that with a straight face. You can tweet me at Dr. Kelly Birks. Did I got that right? Yes, I got that right. Or you can just write to me at Dr. Kelly Nelson Birks. Don't put a period after the DR, okay? drkellynelsonburks.com. That gets us to the website. Or you can email me, I should have said this correctly, at ktestifytotruth@aol.com. So it's drkellynelsonburks.com for the website, and then ktestifytotruth if you want to talk to me directly. And we got a ways to go yet. Now, I'm not quite done with this heavens and earth, because the next step, we'll do this next week, Lord willing, is I want to take you into the New Testament and deal with a little bit more of this work of the heavens and the earth in the New Testament. How did Jesus use the phrase? You've already seen a little bit in 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter. How did the apostles use the phrase? We want to touch on some of this a little bit more, because I'll tell you what, it all just falls right into place together. It all falls together. If you're a preterist. If you're a futurist, man, you got to dance the dance. Aren't you tired of that jig? Isn't that making you tired? Oh my gosh, who's the Antichrist going to be this month?